A police officer walks up to your car. Flashlight hits the window. And then comes a sentence that changes the entire stop. I smell marijuana. Most people think that moment is about drugs. It's not. From a legal perspective, that moment is about behavior. Timing, movement, tone, silence, compliance. Because once that statement is made, the stop changes immediately. And what happens in the next 10 seconds can determine whether the encounter ends with a warning or escalates into a vehicle search, detention, handcuffs, or arrest. Here's what most people miss. Police are not only listening to your words, they're evaluating your reactions. Body cam footage gets reviewed frame by frame. Courts analyze movement patterns. Prosecutors analyze hesitation. Officers analyze what they call indicators. And many drivers unintentionally create suspicion without realizing it. So today, I'm going to break down the 5 things you must do if an officer says they smell weed during a traffic stop. Not internet myths, not emotional advice, real behavioral analysis, real legal interpretation. The way courts and officers actually evaluate these encounters. Because small moments decide big outcomes. Traffic stops are sequences, not conversations. Most drivers think traffic stops are conversations. They're not. They're sequences. From the moment emergency lights activate behind your vehicle, an officer begins building a timeline where your hands were, how quickly you stopped, whether you looked around the car, whether you reached toward the floorboard, whether your seatbelt came off too early, whether you answered immediately or delayed. Everything becomes part of the sequence. And when an officer says they smell marijuana, that statement often becomes the legal pivot point for the rest of the encounter. Because from a legal standpoint, odor can potentially contribute to probable cause depending on the state, the circumstances, and the totality of observations. That does not automatically mean guilt, but it does mean the officer is now evaluating your behavior through a different lens. And this is where people make mistakes. Not because they're criminals, because stress changes behavior. People start over-explaining, moving too quickly, talking too much, arguing too early, reaching without thinking. From a body cam review perspective, those actions can appear far more suspicious than the driver realizes. So let's break down the first thing you must do. Move number 1. Freeze the movement, not the conversation. The first mistake many drivers make happens before they even speak. Movement. The second an officer says, I smell weed, people instinctively start doing things. They reach for bags, they adjust items on the seat, they open compartments, they look toward the back seat, they turn around suddenly. From a behavioral analysis standpoint, officers are trained to interpret sudden movement as potential concealment behavior, not necessarily guilt, potential concealment. And courts frequently analyze movement differently than drivers expect. Here's why. Words can be explained later. Movement is immediate. A prosecutor can pause body cam footage and ask, why did the driver suddenly reach toward the center console immediately after the officer mentioned marijuana odor? Now, the driver may have had a completely innocent reason, but timing matters. Because courts often evaluate actions based on what a reasonable officer would perceive in real time. That legal standard matters enormously, not what you meant. What a reasonable officer could interpret. Here's a realistic scenario. An officer approaches a vehicle during a nighttime stop. The driver's hands are initially visible. The officer says, I'm detecting the odor of marijuana coming from the vehicle. Immediately, the driver leans toward the passenger seat and starts moving a jacket. From the driver's perspective, maybe they're trying to show cooperation. From the officer's perspective, that movement may appear consistent with concealment or retrieval. Now tension increases. Command becomes sharper. Backup may be requested. The encounter escalates. This is where things change. The safest behavior response is controlled stillness, hands visible, minimal movement and no sudden reaching. That doesn't mean refusing lawful instructions. It means avoiding unnecessary physical actions during the highest scrutiny moment of the stop. Because the first 10 seconds after the odor statement often shape the officer's perception of the entire encounter. And perception drives escalation. Move number 2. Control your speech speed and tone. Here's something body cam footage reveals constantly. Stress changes speech patterns. Drivers begin talking faster. Voice pitch changes. Sentences become fragmented. People interrupt themselves. And officers notice this immediately. Now let's be very clear. Nervousness alone is not proof of criminal activity. Courts have repeatedly acknowledged that many innocent people become nervous during police encounters. But timing still matters, because officers are trained to evaluate clusters of behavior, not one isolated action. Fast speech plus sudden movement plus inconsistent answers plus delayed compliance can collectively increase suspicion in the officer's mind. This is why tone control matters more than clever wording. Most people focus entirely on what to say. Experienced officers focus heavily on how it's said. A calm response tends to slow escalation. A frantic response often accelerates it. Here's what most people miss. Over-explaining can actually create investigative pathways. Imagine this scenario. Officer says, "I smell marijuana." Driver immediately responds, "I don't smoke. Nobody here smokes. My cousin borrowed the car yesterday. We were at a concert earlier, but nobody smoked around me, and I haven't done anything." Notice what just happened. The driver introduced multiple new variables voluntarily. Another person, prior vehicle access, a concert environment, possible exposure. The conversation expands instantly from an investigative perspective. The stop just became more complicated. Meanwhile, the officer is observing behavioral cues the entire time. Eye contact, breathing rate, speech pacing, interruptions. This is why controlled communication matters. Short answers, clear tone, and aggressive sarcasm, and unnecessary narrative. And there's another legal reality here. Silence and hostility are not the same thing. Many drivers make the mistake of becoming emotionally defensive. That changes the atmosphere immediately. Courts often distinguish between lawful non-cooperation and active interference. Tone can influence how officers characterize the interaction later in reports. And reports matter, because long before a jury ever sees body cam footage, prosecutors often read officer narratives first. So the goal is not confrontation. The goal is controlled behavior. Professional, calm, measured, because emotionally charged encounters escalate faster than legally complicated ones. Move number 3. Understand the difference between detention and arrest. This is one of the biggest misconceptions during traffic stops. People think, if I'm not under arrest, I can just leave. That is not how investigative detention works. A traffic stop is already a temporary detention under the law. And if an officer claims to smell marijuana, that may extend the scope of the stop, depending on jurisdiction and surrounding facts. This is where legal terminology matters. Reasonable suspicion is a lower standard than probable cause. Reasonable suspicion allows temporary investigation. Probable cause may justify searches or arrests depending on circumstances. Many drivers unintentionally escalate encounters because they misunderstand this distinction. Here's a common example. Officer says, "Step out of the vehicle." Driver immediately argues, "So I'm under arrest?" Officer says no. Driver refuses to exit. Now the legal issue changes completely. The stop is no longer centered only on odor allegations. Now it includes compliance issues. And courts often analyze refusal to obey lawful exit orders very differently than drivers expect, under long-established Supreme Court precedent. Officers generally have broad authority to order occupants out of a vehicle during lawful traffic stops. Again, this does not mean surrendering constitutional rights. It means understanding procedural reality. You can comply physically while still preserving legal defenses later. That distinction is critical. Here's what experienced defense attorneys know. Many cases are won or lost long before trial, not because of dramatic courtroom moments, because of body cam footage. The footage becomes the story. And if the footage shows escalating resistance over basic lawful commands, prosecutors often frame the driver as combative rather than cautious. This is why composure matters strategically, not emotionally. Legally, here's what most people miss. Officers often assess whether a stop feels predictable or unpredictable. Predictable behavior lowers perceived threat levels. Unpredictable behavior raises them. And once officers perceive unpredictability, the likelihood of force escalation increases dramatically. That's the practical reality of roadside encounters. So understand the structure. Detention is not automatically arrest. Compliance is not automatically consent. And preserving your legal position often requires behavioral discipline in the moment. Move number 4. Pay attention to hand visibility and body positioning. This sounds simple, but it changes encounters constantly. Hands are one of the biggest focal points during any police interaction, especially after an officer claims to smell drugs. Why? Because officers are trained to associate narcotics investigations with elevated risk factors. That means your body positioning suddenly matters more than before. Where your hands rest, whether they disappear below the window line, whether you turn your torso suddenly, whether passengers start reaching simultaneously. From a use of force analysis perspective, unclear hand visibility is one of the fastest ways encounters escalate. And body cam footage often looks different than it felt in real time. That's important. Drivers remember intention. Video captures movement. Imagine a nighttime stop. Officer says, "I smell weed." Driver becomes nervous and starts rubbing their face repeatedly while searching for registration paperwork. From the driver's perspective, they're stressed. From the officer's perspective, hands keep disappearing out of view. Now commands become louder. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Stress increases further. Movements become less coordinated. The situation spirals. Here's what experienced officers often describe. Calm drivers move deliberately. Agitated drivers move reactively. Courts frequently evaluate whether officer safety concerns were objectively reasonable under the circumstances. Again, that reasonable officer standard appears repeatedly in legal analysis. And remember something important. An officer does not need certainty to react. They only need an objectively reasonable perception of potential threat. That's a major distinction. This is why controlled body positioning matters. Forward-facing posture, visible hands, slow movements, announcing actions before reaching. Simple things, but legally significant things. Because many roadside escalations begin with ambiguity, not aggression. And ambiguity on body cam footage rarely benefits the driver later. If you're finding this breakdown useful, subscribe to the channel. Not for outrage, not for internet arguments, for real-world legal awareness. Because understanding how encounters are interpreted can change how you move through them. And most people never learn this until after something goes wrong. Now let's continue. Move number 5. Do not confuse politeness with waiving rights. This is where many people become confused. They believe they must choose between two extremes, either aggressive refusal or complete submission. Real legal strategy is usually more controlled than that. You can remain polite while still protecting your rights. And courts analyze that distinction carefully. Here's a realistic example. Officer says, "Do you mind if I search the vehicle?" Many drivers panic in this moment because they assume refusal automatically equals guilt. Legally, that is not true, but behavior still matters. Tone matters, delivery matters, timing matters. An aggressive refusal can escalate tension unnecessarily. A calm response creates a very different interaction dynamic. Notice the difference between these two responses. First response, "You're not searching anything. This is harassment." Second response, "I did not consent to searches." Short, clear, non-combative. From a legal perspective, those are entirely different behavioral presentations. And body cam footage captures that difference immediately. This matters because consent searches are heavily litigated in criminal court. Courts often analyze whether consent was voluntary, pressured, withdrawn, or ambiguous. Clear communication matters enormously. But here's another layer most people miss. Even if you refuse consent, officers may still proceed if they believe they have independent legal justification. That's important to understand. Refusing consent does not physically stop an officer. It preserves your legal position regarding the search later. And experienced defense attorneys care deeply about that distinction, because suppression hearings often focus on procedural details. What was said, what was observed, what legal justification existed before the search began. That timeline becomes critical. This is why calm wording matters strategically. You are not trying to win an argument roadside. You are avoiding unnecessary escalation while preserving clarity. That is a completely different objective. And this brings us to the final point, the one almost nobody thinks about in the moment. Move number 6. Understand that the camera is recording a story. Body cam footage changes everything. Not because cameras capture truth perfectly, because cameras shape interpretation. And once an incident enters a legal system, that footage becomes a foundation of the narrative. Jurors watch it, judges watch it, prosecutors study it, defense attorneys dissect it frame by frame, which means every small action suddenly matters later. The pause before answering, the glance toward the console, the tone shift, the seatbelt removal timing, the delay in rolling down the window, everything becomes part of the story. Here's what many people misunderstand. Courts do not analyze traffic stops emotionally. They analyze them sequentially. What happened first? What changed officer perception? What justified escalation? When did suspicion increase? Was force objectively reasonable? That sequence matters more than dramatic arguments afterward. Imagine this scenario. An officer approaches a vehicle and claims to smell marijuana. The driver immediately becomes verbally confrontational, refuses simple commands, repeatedly reaches toward the center console, and exits the vehicle unexpectedly during questioning. Now compare that to another driver. Hands visible, controlled tone, clear communication, and no sudden movement, and no physical resistance. Even if both drivers ultimately face the same investigation, those body cam narratives feel entirely different, and perception influences outcomes. This does not mean officers are always correct. It means behavior shapes legal interpretation. That's the reality. Because courts often defer to what an objectively reasonable officer perceived at the moment force or escalation occurred. Again, perception and timing. That's why awareness matters. Not internet bravado, not fantasy courtroom speeches. Behavioral discipline. The ability to remain measured while stress is rising. That is what changes encounters. Conclusion. Small moments decide big outcomes. When an officer says they smell weed, most drivers focus on one question. Can they search the car? But from a criminal defense perspective, the more important question is often this: how did the encounter evolve? Because traffic stops are not judged only by outcomes. They're judged by sequences. Small actions, small pauses, small movements. The first 10 seconds, the hand placement, the tone shift, the unnecessary explanation, the sudden reach. Those details shape officer perception in real time. And later, they shape courtroom interpretation. This is why awareness matters. Not aggression, not panic, not rehearsed internet lines. Control, controlled speech, controlled movement, controlled behavior. Because roadside encounters become legal narratives faster than most people realize. And once body cam footage starts telling that story, every second matters. Here's what most people never understand until it's too late. Big consequences often come from small moments, not dramatic ones. The pause before compliance, the movement after a question, the tone after suspicion is mentioned. That's where encounters change. And that's why understanding legal interpretation is so important. Not to fight officers, not to manipulate situations, but to move through high-pressure encounters with awareness. Because the law does not only analyze what happened, it analyzes how it happened. And sometimes that difference changes everything. If you want more real-world breakdowns on traffic stops, police encounters, body cam interpretation, and criminal procedure explained from a legal perspective, subscribe to the channel. Stay aware, stay controlled, and remember, small moments decide big outcomes.